Welcome back to Velshi and Rule. We're continuing to follow breaking news this hour. NBC News now confirming 2 Florida businessmen who helped Rudy Giuliani in Ukraine and who donated to a political action committee supporting President Trump were arrested Wednesday night on charges of campaign finance violation. Both men that you see here on the right, pictured alongside the president's oldest son, Donald Trump Jr., are expected to appear in federal court today. The indictment filed by the Southern District of New York details an elaborate scheme to help other foreign nationals gain access to United States government officials through campaign contributions. There are other big developments today in the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. NBC News confirms House Democrats could drop more subpoenas for witnesses and relevant documents as early as today. Now, earlier, Ukraine's president, the guy on the left, insisted that he faced, quote, no blackmail from President Trump during their phone call on July 25th. And according to the Associated Press, the Ukrainian leader also said that his country will, quote, happily investigate the conspiracy theory pushed by Trump that it was Ukrainians, not Russians, who interfered in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. This as President Trump continues to downplay the whistleblower's credibility, suggesting that the whistleblower is just a spy.
It's the most unfair situation people have seen. No lawyers, you can't have lawyers, you can't speak, you can't do anything. The whole thing is a scam, it's a fix. And I'd like to find who's the person in between the whistleblower and hearing about the conversation. The conversation was, I think, a perfect conversation. But who's the person giving this information? If that person exists, I'm not sure that person exists. But I think it's important, and I say this to Congress, I think it's important to find out who that person is. Because we could have a spy. Meanwhile, President Trump is beefing up his own legal team by hiring former GOP Congressman Trey Gowdy to help in the fight against the House's impeachment inquiry, an inquiry that is currently favored by the majority of Americans. I didn't say Democrats, I said Americans. 51%, in fact, according to a poll from the president's favorite network, Fox News. Joining us now, NBC's Jonathan Allen with new exclusive reporting on the impeachment inquiry. White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour, Yamiche Alcindor, and former special assistant to former President Barack Obama, who also served as the spokesperson for the Obama administration's National Security Council, Ned Price. Welcome to all of you. Yamiche, what are we hearing about new subpoenas?
What we're hearing about is that the House Democrats are readying to really push back on the White House, which has said that it does not want to compel anyone to testify and it doesn't want to provide any documents. And what Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats are basically saying to the White House is, we're going to call your bluff. We're going to continue to subpoena people. We now have these 2 men, these 2 associates of Rudy Giuliani, who were served subpoenas or about to be served subpoenas for documents related to President Trump allegedly pressuring the president of Ukraine for his own political gain. So what Democrats are really doing is saying, we're going to continue to forge ahead with our impeachment inquiry. Even as the president says this is all unfair and this is all a kangaroo court, Democrats are going to go about their work. Jonathan, your analysis suggests that President Trump is sort of double dog daring Nancy Pelosi to vote on impeachment quickly. She doesn't necessarily feel that way, but even if they vote, do you actually think that means that the White House is going to comply and put forth any of the documents that have been requested?
I don't, Stephanie. I think that what the president is desperately hoping for, he's begging for, and we see it in all these venues, whether it's what the Justice Department is doing in court and whether it's what the White House counsel is sending in a letter or the talking points we hear from Republican Congress people on the Hill. He wants an impeachment inquiry vote, and he wants it now. He wants it as soon as possible. He believes, I think, watching this strategy, that you're going to get a high water mark for votes from Republicans. If they vote against an inquiry now, it will be harder for them to vote for articles of impeachment later and explain to constituents that somehow they didn't think it was worth looking into, but they thought that what he did was impeachable later. So he thinks if he can lock in those votes now, he's in a good shape. He can have a show of force. I think for Nancy Pelosi, obviously the opposite is true. With each advancing day, we're getting more facts, and they're not facts that are helpful to the president. We saw, as you and Ali were just talking about, we saw earlier today 2 Ukrainian associates of Rudy Giuliani who have been photographed with the president and with people close to him, his son, people who have been big donors to his campaign, being taken into custody as they were going to an airport to leave the country. They are people who have been involved in American campaigns. This is not evidence that is helpful to the president's cause when he's saying he shouldn't be investigated. And so I think what Pelosi's hoping is that this investigation will continue and that the public support for the investigation and ultimately impeachment will continue to build in her favor.
Ned, a lot of curiosity around Vice President Mike Pence and what his involvement may or may not have been in this. He was asked a question yesterday by NBC's Vaughn Hilliard in Iowa. I want to play the exchange between them and get your reaction on the other side.
Were you ever aware, Mr. Vice President, that interest in the Bidens, that interest in investigating the Bidens was at least in part of the reason for aid to Ukraine being held up?
I never discussed of the issue of the Bidens with President Zelensky.
But within the administration, were you ever aware of within the administration?
What I can tell you is that all of our discussions internally, between the president and our team, in our context, in my office with Ukraine, we're entirely focused on the broader issues of the lack of European support.
But you were aware of the interest.
Ned, there's a lot there that he didn't say that much, but it didn't make a lot of sense.
It didn't make any sense, Ali, and I think we have to look at that dodge, and it really wasn't even an artful dodge, as a flashing red light pointing to Vice President Pence's potential complicity in all of this. And look, I say that remembering that Vice President Pence in early September was the first truly senior administration official to see President Zelensky of Ukraine after that infamous July 25th call between the two leaders. And if we are to assume that Vice President Pence traveled to Poland to meet with Zelensky without knowing the backstory, we'd have to suspend disbelief in a few different areas. First, we'd have to assume that Vice President Pence wasn't briefed on that July 25th phone call, even though his own national security advisor was on that call. Second, we'd have to assume that he didn't ask to review the transcript before he met with Zelensky. That would just be a fundamental element of doing his homework before a big meeting with another world leader. Third, we would have to assume that he wasn't aware of the five-alarm fire that was going on around him as White House lawyers and other NSC officials tried to lock down this transcript on this top-secret code word National Security Council server. And then finally, we also are supposed to believe that he didn't hear of the concerns that were coming from the acting DNI, the Inspector General of the intelligence community, the General Counsel of the CIA. We're supposed to believe that he essentially had closed his ears and was oblivious to all of this. I think all of that makes me a bit skeptical of his attempts to distance himself from this ongoing scandal.
Yamiche, let's talk Trey Gowdy, a notable pick, somebody who I believe in the last few months said he wants to get out of the political arena. He's going in deep. Trey Gowdy was a strong advocate of congressional oversight powers of the executive branch. He is the guy who chaired the House Select Committee on Benghazi. I want to play some sound from him back in 2012.
The notion that you can withhold information and documents from Congress, no matter whether you're the party in power or not in power, is wrong. Respect for the rule of law must mean something irrespective of the vicissitudes of political cycles.
Well, he certainly knows how the rules work because he was highly critical of them back in 2012. What's his position going to be now?
I think it's going to be really hard to say because what you have now is Trey Gowdy being hired by this White House. And it shows that this is increasingly becoming something that the White House feels it needs to deal with at a higher level. For the first few weeks of this, the White House was saying it's going to be all about messaging. They were buying ads on Facebook through the Trump campaign and basically making this all about kind of talking through to the American people to try to make their case. Now you have Trey Gowdy coming in, and he's someone that's going to have to reverse himself in a lot of this if he wants to take the White House's stance, because the White House has said we don't have to provide any documents, we don't have to provide any witnesses. And I know Jonathan was just making the point about the White House wanting this to be a House floor vote on the impeachment inquiry, but I pressed White House aides and I've pressed White House officials about whether or not this White House would comply once that House vote happened, and they said we're non-committal. That's a hypothetical situation. We're not going to talk about that. So they're not even saying once this House vote happens, we're going to cooperate, which is why you see Trey Gowdy Gowdy coming in, because he's now going to have to come up with a whole plan and strategy for whether or not the House votes or not, because this is a White House that does not want to provide any more information because they feel in some ways the wall's closing in on them here. And the president is increasingly paranoid, really, when you think about the fact that he does not trust a lot of the people working around him. He's feeling like there are people that are working around him that want to essentially prove that he was pressuring Ukraine, and he hasn't actually figured out who those people are. And as a result, you see him really, really lashing out. And that's part of the White House strategy here that's not working for them currently.
But then, hold on one second, then isn't it interesting that the president would choose Trey Gowdy? If the president is feeling paranoid or like there aren't people around him that he could trust, Trey Gowdy bowed out and said, you know what? I'm going to step aside. I don't want to do this anymore in leaving office, when he very well could have shown his loyalty to the president and hasn't. Given the president's frame of mind, why would he choose Gowdy?
I think it's really hard to say. I think obviously they think that they need someone that's a legal mind. They need someone who's understanding of the Congress's role in requesting documents and Congress's role in figuring out how they can push back. Because that letter, that 8-page letter that the White House sent over to Congress, if you read the footnotes, it wasn't really a legal document. They were citing both media reports and legal issues. So what you saw was the White House really cobbling together this argument, but it's not, I think, the sound legal argument that they want to make. And I think Trey Gowdy is being brought in for his experience with dealing with this. But that reel that you just showed, you're going to have to keep it around, Stephanie, because we're going to have to be continuing to go back to what Trey Gowdy believed when he was on the Hill, and then what he now believes when he's a lawyer for the White House.
Jonathan, this morning, the president threw cold water on a poll that Stephanie was just talking about. It's a Fox News poll that shows that a majority of Americans feel that Donald Trump should be impeached and removed from office. Does the data add up that you're seeing with other trends we've seen in terms of support for impeachment?
Not only does it add up, I mean, obviously the Fox News poll with Americans supporting impeachment is actually a higher number than some of the other polls we've seen, but the trend lines are all in the same direction, which is to say, a few weeks ago, we saw very little public support for impeachment and removal of the president, and even less support for an impeachment inquiry. What we've seen is a significant shift in the direction of both of those things. I can only assume that with more facts and evidence, things will move in that direction. I think it's very difficult for voters, once they've decided the president should be removed from office, to turn around and decide that he shouldn't be. It is unlikely, when you talk to political experts, they don't think that you see a big reversal in those numbers, that they tend to move in that one direction. One other point I'd like to make, though, about Trey Gowdy, there is a huge difference here between what he was saying back then and what's going on with the White House now. When Trey Gowdy was demanding witnesses and documents in that Benghazi hearing, he got them. We all saw Hillary Clinton testify, I believe it was 13 hours before his Benghazi committee, and he was basically trying to find out what she did wrong in a terrorist attack against an American outpost in Libya, and was unable to come up with any conclusion that she had done anything wrong. All of those hours done. He ended up getting the witness that he wanted, and was unable to prove that there was some deep, dark conspiracy within the American government to let that terrorist attack happen.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there, and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.